Close your eyes now and take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Feel the cool air filling your lungs. Hold it gently for a moment. And now release it softly, letting all the tension flow out of your body like melting snow finding its way to the sea. Tonight, we're traveling together on a peaceful journey back through time, to the Viking Age, to the lands of the North. But this is not a tale of raids or battles. Instead, we're visiting the quiet moments, the everyday life of Nordic people who lived close to the land and sea, who told stories by firelight, who carved beautiful things from wood and bone, who watched the northern lights dance across winter skies. Imagine yourself standing on a gentle hillside in Norway, in the year 900. The evening is cool and clear, and before you stretches a fjord, one of those long, narrow inlets of seawater carved by ancient glaciers. The water is perfectly calm, reflecting the sky like polished silver. The air carries the scent of pine trees and salt water, crisp and clean in your lungs. The sun is low on the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rose gold. In the north during summer, the sun barely sets at all, creating these long, luminous evenings that seem to exist outside of time. The Vikings called this the midnight sun, and during these months, people could work and travel late into what would have been night in southern lands. The extended daylight allowed for longer farming days and safer sea voyages. You can hear the gentle lapping of waves against the rocky shore below. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls, perhaps a sea eagle, those magnificent birds that nested along the Norwegian coast and were considered sacred by the Norse people. The Vikings admired the eagle's strength and keen sight, seeing in it the qualities they valued most. Take another deep breath and let yourself sink even deeper into relaxation. As you stand on this hillside, you notice a small settlement below, nestled in a sheltered spot where a stream meets the fjord. Smoke rises gently from the roofs of several buildings, carried upward on the still air. These are longhouses, the characteristic homes of the Viking Age, built with timber frames and walls of wood or wattle and daub. The typical Viking longhouse was surprisingly large, often measuring 60 to 100 feet in length and 15 to 20 feet wide. The entire extended family lived under one roof, along with their most valuable livestock during winter. The central hearth provided warmth and light, and smoke escaped through a hole in the roof or through the gaps in the thatch. These buildings were designed to conserve heat in the harsh northern climate, with thick walls and few windows. The longhouses weren't solitary structures. Viking farms, called settlements or tons, included several outbuildings, storage sheds for grain and hay, workshops for crafts, stables for horses, and sometimes a separate bathhouse. The Vikings were remarkably clean people for their time, bathing regularly and taking pride in their appearance. They combed their hair daily, trimmed their beards, and even had a special day of the week, Saturday, or Laugardagr in Old Norse, dedicated to washing and bathing. As the light continues to soften and the evening deepens, you begin to walk slowly down toward the settlement. Your footsteps are quiet on the soft grass. There's no rush, no urgency. Time feels different here, slower and more spacious, as if each moment can expand to hold whatever peace you need. The path leads you through a meadow dotted with wildflowers. Even in the Viking Age, people noticed and appreciated the beauty of their natural surroundings. They gave poetic names to the landscape features around them. A mountain might be called Eagle's Nest or a river Swanroad. This love of evocative language would find its fullest expression in their poetry and sagas. You can smell the flowers, wild roses, meadowsweet, and herbs that the Vikings gathered for cooking and medicine. Norse people had extensive knowledge of plants and their uses. They knew which herbs could ease a fever, which could help wounds heal, which could be brewed into soothing teas. This knowledge was passed down through generations, from mother to daughter, from healer to apprentice. As you approach the settlement, you notice how harmoniously it fits into the landscape. The Vikings built with an awareness of their environment, placing buildings to shelter from harsh winds, near fresh water sources, and with access to both farmland and the sea. They understood the land intimately because their survival depended on reading its signs and working with its rhythms rather than against them. The first building you pass is a workshop, its doors standing open to the evening air. Inside, you can see a craftsman working on something, even at this late hour. The Vikings were skilled artisans who created beautiful objects from wood, metal, bone, and stone. They carved intricate designs into everyday items, believing that even useful things should be beautiful. A simple wooden spoon might bear carved patterns, a comb might be decorated with geometric designs, a brooch might be shaped like an animal. The craftsman looks up and nods at you pleasantly, his hands stilling on his work. His face is weathered but kind, marked by years of smiling in the sun and wind. He returns to his carving, and you watch for a moment as he works a piece of antler, transforming it with patient, practiced movements into something both useful and lovely. Antler and bone were precious materials in the Viking world, carved into combs, game pieces, needles, and decorative items. The Vikings wasted nothing, every part of an animal was used. Bones became tools and ornaments, hides became leather for shoes and clothing, sinew became thread, even hooves were boiled down to make glue. You continue walking through the settlement as the evening light grows softer. The air is cooling now, comfortable against your face. You pass a small field where barley grows, its stalks swaying gently in the breeze. Barley was one of the main crops in Viking Age Scandinavia, hardy enough to grow in the short northern summer. It was ground into flour for bread and porridge, and fermented into ale, the common drink for both adults and children, as water sources were often unreliable. Near the field, you see a woman tending a small garden plot. Viking farms always included gardens where families grew vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants. They cultivated onions, cabbages, peas, and herbs like dill and caraway. The woman is checking her plants in the evening cool, and she hums softly as she works, a melody that rises and falls like the landscape itself. She notices you and straightens, brushing soil from her hands. Her dress is a simple woolen garment, dyed a soft blue-gray with plant dyes, perhaps from woad or berries. Vikings were skilled at creating dyes from natural materials, red from madder root, yellow from various flowers, blue from woad, and browns from walnut hulls and tree bark. Clothing was one of the main ways people displayed their status and wealth, with the quality of the fabric and the richness of the dyes indicating prosperity. The woman's dress is fastened at the shoulders with two oval brooches connected by strings of colorful beads. These distinctive oval brooches, called tortoise brooches because of their dome shape, were characteristic of Viking Age women's dress. They were often elaborately decorated and could be quite valuable. Between the brooches hung useful items on chains, perhaps a key to the household stores, a needle case, or small scissors. A woman wearing the keys to the household was recognized as the manager of the home, a position of considerable authority and respect. The woman smiles at you, a quiet welcome, before returning to her work. Everything here feels peaceful and unhurried. The settlement isn't sleeping yet, but it's winding down from the day's activities, entering that gentle transition from work to rest. You notice children playing near one of the longhouses, their laughter floating on the evening air. They're engaged in some kind of game, perhaps knucklebones or a ball game. Viking children played much as children everywhere do, with toys carved from wood, small boats for floating in streams, dolls made from scraps of cloth. They also had responsibilities from a young age, helping with farm chores, learning crafts, and caring for younger siblings. The sound of their play is comforting, a reminder that life in every age includes joy and laughter, family and community. These children will grow up hearing stories of distant lands, of gods and heroes, of ancestors who braved storms and explored unknown seas. But tonight, they're simply children playing in the long northern evening, their voices blending with the sounds of the settlement. As twilight deepens, you find yourself drawn toward the main longhouse. Warm light glows from within, visible through the open door, and you can hear the murmur of voices and smell something wonderful: bread baking, fish cooking, the sweet smoke of the hearth fire. You step through the doorway into a space that feels surprisingly welcoming. The longhouse interior is a single large room with a central hearth running down the middle. The fire burns steady and warm, its flames dancing in shades of orange and gold. Smoke rises toward the roof, escaping through the smoke hole above. The walls are lined with wooden platforms that serve as benches during the day and beds at night, covered with furs and woven blankets. The Vikings were master woodworkers, and you can see evidence of their skill everywhere, in the carved posts that support the roof, in the smooth planks of the walls, in the benches and chests that furnish the space. They used axes almost exclusively for woodworking rather than saws, achieving remarkable precision with this single tool. A skilled Viking carpenter could split a log along the grain with such accuracy that the resulting planks needed little additional smoothing. Several people are gathered around the hearth, engaged in evening activities. A woman sits at a vertical loom near the wall, weaving fabric in the flickering firelight. The loom is weighted with clay or stone weights that keep the threads taut, and she passes the weft thread through with practiced ease, creating cloth that will become clothing for her family. Textile production was one of the most time-consuming tasks in Viking life, and women were highly skilled at every stage, preparing flax or wool, spinning thread, dyeing fibers, and weaving cloth. Viking women had considerable rights and autonomy compared to women in many other medieval societies. They could own property, inherit land, request divorces, and manage their household's resources. The keys a woman wore symbolized her authority over the home stores and wealth. While men might travel for trade or military expeditions, women often managed the farm and made important decisions in their absence. Near the fire, a man is working on a piece of leather, cutting and stitching it into what might become shoes or a bag. Leatherworking was an essential craft, producing shoes, belts, bags, and even armor. Vikings wore leather shoes that were surprisingly sophisticated, with separate soles stitched to uppers, and they often decorated them with stamped or incised patterns. The smell of baking bread grows stronger, and you see that flatbreads are cooking on hot stones near the fire. Viking bread was usually unleavened, made from barley or oat flour and cooked on flat stones or iron griddles. The resulting bread was dense and hearty, perfect for soaking up stews or spreading with butter. The Vikings also made a kind of porridge from barley or oats, sometimes sweetened with honey or mixed with nuts and dried fruits. An elderly man sits on one of the benches, and several younger people have gathered around him. His voice is low and rhythmic, and you realize he's telling a story. This is how the Vikings preserved their history and culture, through oral tradition, stories passed from generation to generation, memorized and recited beside winter fires. You settle onto a bench near the back, close enough to hear but not intrusive. The elderly storyteller's voice has a musical quality, rising and falling like waves. He's recounting a saga, one of those long narrative tales that the Vikings so loved. The sagas told of heroes and ancestors, of feuds and friendships, of journeys to distant lands and the everyday dramas of family life. These stories wouldn't be written down for several more centuries. In the Viking Age, they lived in memory, kept alive by skilled storytellers called skalds who could recite thousands of lines of poetry and prose. The act of telling and listening to stories was a form of entertainment, education, and cultural preservation all combined. On long winter nights, when darkness fell early and lasted until late morning, storytelling helped pass the hours and strengthen community bonds. The language the storyteller speaks is Old Norse, the ancestor of modern Scandinavian languages. It was a Germanic language, related to Old English, and it gave many words to the English language: sky, knife, window, Thursday, Thor's day, husband, and hundreds of others. Even today, if you speak English, you're using words that Vikings brought with them on their travels. As the story continues in the background, you find your attention drawn to the details of the longhouse. Every surface shows evidence of careful craftsmanship. The wooden posts are carved with intricate interlacing patterns, a style called gripping beast by modern scholars, where stylized animals seem to grip each other and themselves in an endless knot. The Vikings had a distinctive artistic style that evolved over the centuries of the Viking Age, from approximately 793 to 1066 CE. This span of nearly 300 years saw the Norse people expand from their Scandinavian homelands to establish settlements in Iceland, Greenland, parts of Britain and Ireland, Normandy and France, and even briefly in North America, which they called Vinland. Near you on the wall hangs a round wooden shield, painted in alternating sections of yellow and red. Viking shields were made from thin wooden planks, usually lime or fir, held together with an iron boss in the center that protected the hand grip. The shields were surprisingly light, about 7 pounds on average, allowing warriors to move them quickly for defense. But tonight, hanging peacefully on the wall, this shield is simply a beautiful object, its colors glowing in the firelight. You notice several chests along the walls, their surfaces carved with geometric patterns or mythological scenes. These chests stored the family's valuables, extra clothing, precious fabrics, jewelry, and heirlooms. Vikings didn't have many possessions by modern standards, but what they had was well made and treasured. The concept of built-in closets didn't exist. Instead, everything was stored in chests that could be secured with locks. A young woman sits near the fire working on embroidery, her needle flashing as she pulls colored wool thread through linen fabric. Viking embroidery was sophisticated, using a variety of stitches to create elaborate designs. Archaeological finds have preserved fragments showing intricate patterns and even figurative scenes. These embroidered textiles decorated clothing, wall hangings, and other fabric items, adding beauty and demonstrating the skill of the maker. The Vikings used sheep's wool for most textiles, but they also produced linen from flax plants. The finest linen came from abroad, imported through vast trade networks. The best fabric might be reserved for special occasions, weddings, religious festivals, or to honor important guests. A bolt of fine cloth could be as valuable as precious metal, used sometimes as currency in trades. Near the embroiderer, a boy of perhaps 10 or 11 years is practicing carving runes into a small piece of wood. Runes were the letters of the alphabet used by Germanic peoples, including the Vikings. The runic alphabet, called the Futhark after its first 6 letters, F, U, T, H, A, R, K, consisted of 16 characters in the younger Futhark used during most of the Viking Age. Each rune had a name and meaning beyond just its sound. For example, the rune for F was called Fe, meaning cattle or wealth. Runes were carved rather than written, which gave them their angular appearance. Straight lines were easier to carve into wood, stone, or bone than curves. Vikings carved runes on many objects: memorial stones for the dead, wooden sticks for messages, valuable items to mark ownership, and sometimes just playful graffiti. In the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, there's still visible a runic inscription carved by a Viking who wrote essentially Halfdan was here, proving that the impulse to leave one's mark is truly timeless. The boy looks up from his carving and catches your eye. He grins, pleased to have an audience, and shows you his work, his name, perhaps, carved in runes. You smile back, and he returns to his practice with renewed concentration. Learning to read and write runes was an important skill, though not everyone was literate. Those who could read and write held specialized knowledge that made them valuable to their communities. The evening meal is being prepared now, and the atmosphere in the longhouse becomes even more convivial. Vikings took hospitality seriously. It was a sacred duty to welcome travelers and provide food and shelter. There's even a saying from the Havamol, a collection of Old Norse wisdom poetry: a man should be a friend to his friend and give gift for gift. The meal being prepared is simple but nourishing. There's a pot of stew hanging over the fire, containing fish, root vegetables, and herbs. The Vikings ate whatever the land and sea provided. Fish was a staple, especially in coastal areas, but they also kept sheep, cattle, pigs, and goats. They hunted deer, elk, and seabirds, and gathered wild plants, berries, and nuts. Nothing was wasted. Bones were boiled for broth, blood was made into sausages, and every edible part of an animal was used. Flatbreads are stacked on a wooden board, still warm from cooking. There's butter, churned from the milk of their cows and sheep, and perhaps cheese as well. The Vikings were skilled at preserving food through various methods: drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting. In a climate with long winters, preservation techniques meant the difference between plenty and starvation. Drinking horns are being filled with ale from a large ceramic vessel. Vikings did drink from horns, though they also used wooden cups and bowls. The horns couldn't be set down without spilling, so once you picked one up, you were committed to drinking. This created a social ritual around drinking, with horns passed from person to person in a ceremonial manner. The ale is mild, flavored with herbs and perhaps honey. Vikings didn't have hops for brewing, Hops weren't used in Scandinavian brewing until later. Instead, they used a mixture of herbs called grut, which might include yarrow, bog myrtle, or juniper. The resulting ale had a complex, slightly spicy flavor quite different from modern beer. The Vikings also made mead from fermented honey, a drink reserved for special occasions and associated with poetry and inspiration. As people gather for the meal, there's easy conversation and laughter. Family members ask about each other's day, the children's play, the progress on various crafts and farm work, plans for tomorrow. There's a feeling of contentment, of being exactly where you're meant to be, doing what needs to be done, surrounded by people who matter to you. The Viking concept of family extended beyond the nuclear family to include the entire household and even distant relatives. Family connections were crucial for survival and success, providing economic support, political alliances, and help in times of trouble. Your reputation and your family's reputation were intertwined, creating strong incentives to behave honorably and support your kin. Food is served on wooden trenchers, flat plates carved from single pieces of wood. Everyone has their own knife for cutting food, forks weren't used, and spoons were shared or personal depending on the household. People eat with their fingers and their knives, taking food directly from common bowls or cutting portions from larger pieces of meat or fish. The meal proceeds at a relaxed pace, with plenty of time for conversation between courses. Talk turns to plans for the coming days. The hay must be cut soon while the weather holds. Someone needs to check the fishing nets. There's wood to split for winter. The conversation is practical but not anxious. These people know their tasks and their seasons, and there's comfort in the rhythms of necessary work. After the meal, someone brings out a taffel board, a Viking strategy game played on a checkered board with pieces of different types. Two men begin to play while others watch and offer commentary. Nefatafel, the most common version, was played throughout the Viking world and required strategic thinking. The game symbolized a king defended by his warriors against attackers, and it was popular entertainment during long evenings. Games weren't just for adults. Viking children played with knucklebones, wooden toys, and practiced their future roles through play. Boys might have wooden swords and practice fighting moves, while girls might have small looms and learn weaving. But children also had time for pure play, running, climbing, swimming in summer, sledding in winter. The Vikings understood that childhood was a time for learning through play as well as work. As the evening deepens further, the atmosphere in the longhouse becomes quieter, more contemplative. The fire has burned down to glowing coals, and someone adds a few more logs, sending sparks dancing upward. The elderly storyteller who was speaking earlier begins a new tale, and this time it's about the gods. Norse mythology was rich and complex, filled with gods, giants, dwarves, elves, and other beings. The gods lived in Asgard, one of 9 worlds connected by the world tree Yggdrasil, an immense ash tree that held all of existence in its branches. These weren't distant, perfect beings but characters with flaws, appetites, and personalities, gods who struggled, made mistakes, and faced their own form of mortality at Ragnarok, the prophesied end of the world. But tonight's story isn't about battles or doom. The storyteller speaks of Freyr, the god of fertility, peace, and prosperity. Freyr was associated with kingship, crops, and sunshine, the peaceful aspects of life that made civilization possible. His sacred animal was the boar, and Swedish kings claimed descent from him. In his honor, the Vikings held festivals at harvest time, thanking him for the year's bounty. Vikings worshipped their gods through various means. They made offerings at sacred sites, special groves, particular trees, or natural formations. They held communal feasts called blots where animals were sacrificed and the meat shared among the community. These gatherings were social and religious events combined, strengthening community bonds while honoring the divine. The storyteller's voice rises and falls, describing how Freyr fell in love with a giantess named Jur and gave up his magical sword to win her hand. It's a love story, ultimately, about sacrifice for love, a theme that resonated with the Vikings as much as it does with us. The listeners are quiet, absorbed in the tale, seeing the scenes unfold in their imaginations just as generations had before them. Norse religion coexisted with a deep respect for the natural world. The Vikings saw spirits in the land itself, landvetter, or land spirits, that protected particular places. When approaching Iceland by ship, for example, Vikings were supposed to remove the dragon head prow from their vessels so as not to frighten the land spirits. This belief system encouraged care for the environment and recognition that humans were part of nature, not separate from it. Another important figure in Norse belief was the Valva, a seeress who could perform seer, a form of magic that involved prophecy and influencing fate. The Valva traveled from community to community, welcomed and honored for her abilities. She would sit on a high platform, enter a trance state aided by drumming or chanting, and answer questions about the future, give advice, or work magic for healing or protection. The practice of seer shows that Norse spirituality included roles for women as religious specialists and that magic was an accepted part of their worldview. The boundary between the mundane and magical, the everyday and the spiritual, was permeable in Viking understanding. Dreams were taken seriously as messages, omens were read in the flight of birds or the patterns of clouds, and luck was a quality that could cling to people and objects. As the story concludes, someone begins to hum a melody, and others join in, creating a soft chorus of sound. Viking music included singing, often without instruments, though they also used simple instruments like wooden flutes, lyres, and drums. Much of the music is lost to time, as it wasn't written down, but we know they valued poetry and song highly, especially the complex poetry of the skalds with its intricate rules of meter and metaphor. The singing continues for a while, the voices blending in harmonies that seem to reach back through time. The words are in Old Norse, their meaning lost to you but their emotion clear, something about the sea, perhaps, or the changing seasons, or the bonds of kinship. The melody is haunting and beautiful, a reminder that humans have always expressed their deepest feelings through music. As the singing fades into comfortable silence, your thoughts turn to what lies beyond the longhouse, beyond the settlement. You think of the fjord outside, and the ships that travel its waters. The Viking longship, that elegant vessel that made the Viking Age possible, represents perhaps their greatest technical achievement. In your mind's eye, you see a longship drawn up on the beach, its sleek lines perfect for cutting through waves. The Vikings developed a unique shipbuilding technique called clinker construction, where overlapping planks were fastened together with iron rivets and flexible joints. This made their ships both strong and flexible, able to twist slightly with the waves rather than fighting against them, allowing them to survive rough seas that would have destroyed more rigid vessels. A typical longship might measure 75 feet in length and only 16 feet at its widest point, giving it remarkable speed and maneuverability. The ship sat low in the water, drawing only about 3 feet, which meant it could navigate shallow rivers and even be pulled onto beaches for landing. This shallow draft, combined with the ship's lightness, a longship could be carried by its crew when necessary, gave Vikings incredible flexibility in where they could travel. The ships were powered by both sail and oars. The single square sail, made from wool cloth and often dyed in bright stripes, could propel the ship at speeds of up to 10 knots in good wind. When the wind died or when navigating narrow channels, the crew could shift the mast and use oars instead. Each crew member had an oar port, and rowing was done in rhythm, creating a coordination that built team unity. Navigation was an art requiring deep knowledge of the sea and sky. Vikings navigated primarily by observing the sun, stars, wave patterns, wind direction, and the flight of seabirds. They had no compasses, but experienced navigators could determine direction from the sun's position even on cloudy days, possibly using sunstones, crystals like calcite that could detect polarized light and thus locate the sun's position even when obscured by clouds. The Vikings possessed remarkable seamanship. They sailed from Norway to Iceland, a journey of about 900 miles across open ocean. From Iceland, they reached Greenland, and from Greenland, they eventually reached North America, establishing a short-lived settlement at Longships Meadows in Newfoundland around the year 1000. This made them the first Europeans to reach the Americas, 500 years before Columbus, though their settlement didn't last and their discovery had no lasting impact on history. But most Viking sea journeys weren't about exploration or raiding. They were about fishing, trade, transportation, and communication. The sea connected communities along the Norwegian coast far more effectively than land routes could. News, goods, and people traveled by water, making the fjords and coastal waters the highways of the Viking world. You could almost hear the rhythmic splash of oars, the creak of the rigging, the calls of sailors to each other. The Vikings were comfortable on the sea in a way that seems almost unfathomable to modern people. They grew up with boats, learned to swim young, understood weather and water from childhood. The sea was dangerous, certainly, but it was also familiar, the source of food and livelihood, the road to everywhere they might want to go. Your attention returns to the longhouse, where people are preparing for sleep. But before the household settles for the night, you notice various finished crafts being carefully put away, a reminder of the many skills that made Viking life possible. Vikings were remarkable craftspeople who worked in many materials. Blacksmiths forged not just weapons but also tools, nails, cooking implements, and decorative items from iron. Viking smiths understood different heat treatments and could create steel by adding carbon to iron, producing blades that could hold a sharp edge. A good sword was a treasured possession, often given a name and passed down through generations. Woodworkers created everything from ships to spoons, from houses to household goods. They understood wood, how different species worked, which wood split easily, which carved smoothly, which resisted rot. A skilled woodworker could look at a tree and see the objects hidden within it, knowing exactly how to work with the grain to bring them forth. Women were skilled at textile crafts, spinning, weaving, sewing, and embroidery. Creating cloth was extraordinarily time-consuming. The wool had to be sheared, cleaned, carded, spun into thread, dyed, and woven into cloth before it could even be cut and sewn into clothing. Archaeologists estimate that producing enough cloth for one person's clothing could take hundreds of hours. This made textiles valuable commodities, and women's textile work was economically crucial to their households. The Vikings were also traders, and their trade networks stretched from the North Atlantic to the Middle East. They traded furs, walrus ivory, and amber from the Baltic south and east, exchanging them for silver, silk, spices, glass, and other luxury goods. Viking traders established settlements that became major cities: Dublin in Ireland, York in England, Novgorod in Russia. The name Russia itself likely comes from the Rus, the Scandinavian traders and warriors who traveled the river routes of Eastern Europe. Silver was particularly valued, used both for making jewelry and as currency. Vikings didn't mint coins initially but measured silver by weight, cutting apart jewelry and other silver objects into hack silver to make payments. Scales for weighing silver were essential trade tools. By the end of the Viking Age, Scandinavian kingdoms were minting their own coins, showing their increasing sophistication and integration with European trade networks. Trade brought new ideas along with new goods. Byzantine silk, Arab silver, Frankish swords, English glass, each object told a story of distant lands and different peoples. The Vikings were curious about the wider world, and their travels created cultural exchanges that benefited both the Norse and the peoples they encountered. While history often remembers the Viking raids, the peaceful trade was far more common and had a deeper long-term impact. Archaeological finds from Viking graves show how far these trade goods traveled. A Buddha statue from India found in Sweden, Byzantine coins in Norway, Arabic silver in Denmark. These objects crossed half the world to reach Scandinavia, passing through countless hands, each exchange representing a moment of connection between cultures. Outside the longhouse, the midnight sun has finally dipped below the horizon, though the sky remains luminous. Inside, people are settling onto their sleeping platforms, wrapping themselves in blankets and furs. But before they sleep, there's talk of the coming seasons and the work they'll bring. The Viking year was divided not into 4 seasons but into 2 main seasons, summer and winter. Summer, the season of light and growth and activity, lasted from roughly April to October. Winter, the season of darkness and cold and indoor work, lasted from October to April. The transitions between these seasons were marked by important festivals. Summer began with a festival in mid-April, a time to celebrate the return of light and warmer weather, to drive livestock to summer pastures, and to prepare for the busy months of fishing, farming, and trading. This was when ships were made ready after their winter storage, when fields were plowed and planted, when life turned outward again after the winter's inward focus. The main farming work came in summer, planting in spring, tending crops through summer, harvesting in late summer and early fall. Hay had to be cut and dried for winter fodder, a critical task since livestock had to be fed through the long months when nothing grew. Fishing was intense during certain seasons when specific fish were running, herring in spring, cod through summer. Vikings dried or salted fish to preserve it, creating stockfish that could last for years. Late September brought harvest festivals, celebrations of the year's bounty. This was called Vetranar, or Winter Nights, marking the transition to the darker half of the year. People gave thanks for successful harvests, slaughtered animals that couldn't be kept through winter, and prepared for the cold months ahead. It was a time of feasting, of enjoying abundance before the lean times, of gathering with community to share the year's success. Winter was not a time of hibernation but of different kinds of work. This was when people focused on indoor crafts, weaving, carving, making tools, repairing equipment. Long dark evenings were spent telling stories, playing games, working on projects that required patience and skill. Winter was also a time for visiting between farms, for weddings and other celebrations, for strengthening social bonds. Midwinter brought the Yule Festival, celebrated around the winter solstice. This was the darkest time of year, when the sun barely rose above the horizon, and people marked the turning point with feasting, drinking, and ritual. They burned a Yule log that was supposed to burn through the 12 days of celebration. They brought evergreen boughs indoors, a reminder that life persisted even in the depths of winter. Many modern Christmas traditions have roots in these ancient midwinter celebrations. The Vikings understood that humans needed to mark time's passage, to create moments of celebration and gathering that broke the routine of everyday work. Their festivals connected them to the cycles of nature, to their community, and to their gods. The same impulse that makes us celebrate holidays today moved them to gather in midwinter darkness and summer light, to feast and give thanks and strengthen bonds with each other. The longhouse is very quiet now. Most people have settled to sleep, their breathing soft and rhythmic. But you're not quite ready to sleep yet. The elderly storyteller catches your eye and gestures for you to join him near the fire, where a few coals still glow with warmth. He speaks softly, not wanting to disturb the sleepers, and tells you about the Sagas, those long narrative tales that preserved Viking history and culture. The word saga simply means something said, a story told aloud. For centuries, these stories existed only in oral tradition, memorized and recited by skilled speakers who could hold thousands of lines in their memory. The sagas fell into different categories. The Islandingasogur, or Sagas of Icelanders, told stories of early Icelandic settlers, their feuds and alliances, loves and losses, voyages and settlements. These were essentially historical fiction, based on real people and events but shaped into compelling narratives with themes and dramatic structure. The formal Darsagar, or legendary sagas, told stories set in a mythic past, mixing history and fantasy, heroes and monsters. These included tales of famous heroes like Sigurd who slew the dragon Fafnir, stories that inspired later works like Beowulf and even modern fantasy literature. Then there were the Konungasagur, or King's Sagas, chronicling the lives and deeds of Scandinavian kings. These served as both history and political statement, showing how kings should and shouldn't behave, preserving the memory of great rulers and warning against tyranny. The sagas weren't written down until the 12th and 13th centuries, well after the end of the Viking Age, when Iceland's scholars, many of them Christian monks, finally committed the old stories to parchment. Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic poet and historian who lived from 1179 to 1241, wrote down many of the Norse myths and composed the Prose Edda, our main source for understanding Norse mythology. Without his work, much of what we know about Viking beliefs would have been lost. The oral tradition that preserved these stories required remarkable memory skills. Skalds memorized complex poetry with strict rules of meter, alliteration, and metaphor. A single poem might run hundreds of lines, all held perfectly in memory. This wasn't rote memorization but deep internalization, The Skald understood the story so thoroughly that they could adapt it to different contexts while keeping its essential form intact. The poetic devices Vikings used helped with memorization. Kennings, those elaborate metaphors that called the sea whale rode in blood battle sweat, created vivid images that stuck in memory. Alliteration tied lines together. Regular meter created rhythm that the mind could follow. Poetry wasn't just artistic expression but a memory technology, a way of encoding important information in a form that could be reliably transmitted across generations. This oral culture meant that eloquence was highly valued. Being able to speak well, to tell a good story, to compose poetry, these skills brought respect and sometimes wealth. Skalds were welcome at the courts of kings and jarls, their poetry honoring their patrons and preserving their deeds for posterity. A skilled skald could immortalize you or mock you to lasting shame, making words as powerful as weapons. The storyteller's voice has grown softer as he speaks, and you find your eyes growing heavy. His words seem to come from very far away now, blending with the crackle of the fire and the quiet breathing of the sleepers. He's talking about how memory works, how stories connect past and present, how we're all links in a chain stretching back through time. You step outside the longhouse into the cool night air, needing a moment before you sleep. The sky has been dark for a while now, and when you look up, you catch your breath. The northern lights are dancing across the sky, ribbons of green and purple light that shimmer and flow like silk banners in an invisible wind. The Vikings called the northern lights the Bifrost, sometimes thinking of them as the bridge between Earth and Asgard, the realm of the gods. Other times they saw them as reflections from the shields of Valkyries riding across the sky, or as spirits of the dead dancing in the heavens. The lights were considered omens, signs from the divine realm, beautiful and slightly uncanny. The aurora borealis occurs when charged particles from the sun interact with Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere, but the Vikings didn't know this scientific explanation. What they knew was beauty, the way the lights moved like living things, changing colors, appearing and disappearing, creating a spectacle that made even the darkest winter night beautiful. You stand in the peaceful darkness, watching the lights flow and shift. The air is cold against your face, carrying the scent of wood smoke and pine. Everything is very still, very quiet. You can hear the distant sound of water, the stream that runs past the settlement, making its way to the fjord. Somewhere an owl calls, a long, low note that seems to emphasize the silence rather than break it. This moment, standing under the northern lights in the Viking Age, feels timeless. Humans have stood like this for thousands of years, looking up at the sky in wonder, finding patterns and meaning in the stars and lights above. The Vikings saw their gods and heroes in the constellations. They navigated by the stars, told time by them, understood their movements well enough to predict seasons and tides. The night sky in the Viking Age was much darker than ours, unpolluted by electric lights. The Milky Way stretched bright and clear overhead, what the Vikings called the Winter Street. On a clear night, you could read by starlight, see your shadow cast by the moon. This darkness meant humans lived more intimately with celestial rhythms, aware of the moon's phases, the movements of planets, the seasonal shifts of visible constellations. Vikings understood they were part of something vast. The world tree Yggdrasil connected 9 worlds in their cosmology, from the realm of the gods to the realm of the dead, with the human world, Midgard, in the middle. This worldview gave them a place in a larger cosmos, connected to forces greater than themselves while still having agency and importance in their own realm. As you watch the northern lights, you feel that same sense of connection. The lights dance silently, green fire flowing across the sky, pulsing and shimmering. Time seems to stop. You could stand here forever, watching this ancient mystery play out above you. The cold doesn't matter. The lateness of the hour doesn't matter. There's only this moment, this beauty, this connection to the turning sky above. Eventually, the cold drives you back inside. You slip quietly into the longhouse, not wanting to disturb anyone. The fire has burned very low now, just a few embers glowing in the ash. The warmth inside feels wonderful after the cold outside, wrapping around you like a blanket. You find a spot on one of the sleeping platforms, and someone has left furs and blankets there for you. You wrap yourself in their warmth, feeling the softness of wool against your skin. The platform is surprisingly comfortable, wide enough to stretch out fully, the furs providing cushioning and warmth. Around you, people sleep peacefully. You can hear the quiet sounds of their breathing, the occasional rustle as someone shifts in their sleep. The longhouse feels safe and sheltered, a warm human space carved out of the cold northern night. Outside, the winter stars will overhead, but inside, all is warmth and rest. Your thoughts drift as you lie there, warm and comfortable. You think about everything you've witnessed tonight, the crafts being practiced with such skill, the stories being told and preserved, the community gathered together in the longhouse, the northern lights dancing across the sky. The Viking Age lasted roughly 3 centuries, from the late 8th century to the late 11th century. It began with raids on monasteries in England and ended with the Christianization of Scandinavia and the integration of the Nordic kingdoms into medieval European civilization. But the Vikings were never just raiders. They were farmers and craftspeople, traders and explorers, poets and storytellers. They settled Iceland and Greenland, creating new societies in lands never before inhabited by humans. They explored North America 5 centuries before Columbus. They founded cities that still exist today. They created beautiful art and complex poetry. They developed sophisticated legal codes and democratic assemblies called things, where free men gathered to settle disputes and make laws. The Viking worldview emphasized personal honor, loyalty to family and friends, courage in the face of adversity, and the importance of living a life worthy of remembrance. Their ethics weren't identical to ours, but they grappled with the same fundamental questions: how to live well, how to treat others, what makes a life meaningful. As Christianity slowly spread through Scandinavia during the 10th and 11th centuries, the old ways began to fade. But they didn't disappear entirely. The sagas were written down. The place names remained. The language evolved but kept its structure. The DNA mixed but didn't vanish. Modern Scandinavians are descendants of Vikings, carrying forward their heritage in visible and invisible ways. And beyond Scandinavia, the Viking influence spread wherever they traveled. In England, the Danelaw region was heavily influenced by Scandinavian settlement, visible still in place names ending in by and Thorpe. Normandy was named for the Northmen who settled there. The Varangian Guard that protected Byzantine emperors was composed of Viking warriors. Rus traders on the Volga River carried northern furs to eastern markets. The Vikings were part of the great human story, people adapting to their environment, creating culture and meaning, reaching beyond their homeland to explore and connect with others. They made beautiful things and destroyed beautiful things. They could be cruel and they could be generous. They were, in short, fully human, with all that entails. Your thoughts are becoming fuzzy now, fragmenting into dreamlike images. You see a longship sailing across a calm sea, its reflection perfect in the still water. You see the northern lights dancing, green fire in the sky. You see skilled hands carving wood, weaving cloth, forging metal into useful and beautiful forms. The warmth of the firs wraps around you more completely. Your breathing has slowed, deep and regular. The slight sounds of the longhouse, the breathing of the sleepers, the settling of the fire, the distant sound of wind, all blend into a peaceful background, like waves on a shore. You feel yourself drifting, like a ship with its sail furled, carried gently on a current. There's no need to resist. The longhouse is warm and safe. The community around you sleeps peacefully. The night outside is cold but beautiful, filled with stars and the possibility of northern lights. Let yourself drift now, deeper into relaxation. The Viking world fades gently, becoming memory and dream. But something of it stays with you, the peace of a life lived close to nature's rhythms, the satisfaction of work done with skill and care, the warmth of community and family gathered together. The elderly storyteller's voice seems to echo from far away, speaking the traditional words for ending a saga, and here ends this tale. But really, no tale truly ends. Stories flow from one to another, lives connect across generations, and the human experience continues in an endless chain of telling and retelling, living and remembering. Sleep now, deeply and peacefully. Let the darkness hold you gently. Let your breathing carry you down into dreams. The longhouse protects you. The firs warm you. The fire burns low but steady. Everything is as it should be. In the morning, though that's far away still, the sun will rise again, as it always does. Life will continue its eternal patterns. But for now, there's only rest, only sleep, only the gentle darkness of a peaceful night. Drift now, sleep, let go of everything. The Vikings understood rest as essential to life, the necessary pause between labors, the renewal that makes tomorrow possible. They built their lives around rhythms of work and rest, effort and relaxation, waking and sleeping. Follow their wisdom now. Release your hold on the day. Let your mind quiet. Let your body rest completely. Sleep deeply, the sleep of someone who has worked well and lived fully, who has nothing to fear and everything to rest for. The stars turn slowly overhead. The northern lights may still be dancing, though your eyes are closed now. The longhouse shelters you, the firs warm you, and sleep takes you gently down into peace. Sleep now, sleep deeply, peacefully, completely. Let the Viking world fade into dreams. Let time itself dissolve. There's only warmth and darkness in the quiet breathing of sleep. Rest now, rest completely. The journey is over. The story is told. And you are safe and warm and drifting into deep and peaceful sleep.